So when we ended the last episode, the Warlock Lord had been dead for 500 years, and peace had descended on the Forelands like a giant comfy blanket. So why is the druid Allanon looking for a child of Shannara? Well, it turns out that the Warlock Lord did not die, which leads us to the first book, Sword of Shannara. It took 500 years, but Brona has finally pulled himself back together, more or less, and is starting some crap again. This crap wakes up Allanon, now the last remaining druid, from the druid sleep, the mechanism that allows him to live so long. Allanon takes a trip to the north to the Skull Kingdom, Brona's hometown, and discovers that the Warlock Lord is very much around, and that he is gathering his forces to take another stab at that whole world domination thing. Brona has the same info as Allanon when it comes to the House of Shannara, and sends some of his minions, called Skullbearers, to kill the remaining descendants of the king who the sword was made for, Shannara. It seems that only those who have the blood of Shannara coursing through their veins, however little it might be, can wield the sword. Allanon finds out too late and can't save any of them. Luckily, he discovers one descendant was missed, a half-elf named Shea, living in a community called Shady Vale with his adoptive family. Our intrepid druid makes a beeline for the Vale, hoping to arrive before Brona and his horde discover their clerical error. Once there, he finds not only Shea, but his adoptive brother, Flick. The two are inseparable, so after a history lesson from Allanon on the true history of the world, he takes off, leaving with Shea 3 blue elf stones, and the warning to them to skedaddle if they see the sign of the skull. A few weeks later, they do indeed see the sign of the skull, on a skull bearer no less, and take off, not wanting to bring death and destruction to their sleepy little hamlet. They journey to the Kingdom of Lee, where they meet up with the Prince of Lee, Minion. The royalty of Lee are big fans of random adventures, as you find out in many of the books they appear in. So being bored, Minion decides to go on the journey with the Valemen to offer protection and to hopefully have an adventure. The 3 friends travel to Culhaven, a dwarven city in the Eastland, and there meet up with Allanon and some new friends. Now that they have their fellowship, the real adventure can start. The Sword of Shannara, the only weapon that can kill the Warlock Lord, is kept safe in the druid keep called Paranor. Unfortunately, on the way to Paranor, Shea falls over a waterfall, becoming separated from the rest of the group. Allanon uses some druid magic to determine Shea is alive and well, which allows him to convince the rest of the group to continue on to Paranor to retrieve the sword. Sadly for our merry band, the Warlock Lord, being a former druid and all-around bad man, also knew the sword was at Paranor and sent some of his muscle, a skull bearer, and an attachment of his northern army. After the battle, they discover that the sword was taken by the gnome Orlfane, who is driven mad by the power of the sword, which leads him north to the waiting Warlock Lord, who has begun his assault on the Forelands by attacking the Southland. The remainder of the group decide to split up. Part of the company goes with Allanon to invade the Warlock Lord's camp, hoping to rescue Shea, who they assume is being held prisoner there. Flick, disguised by Allanon, sneaks through the camp to a tent that holds an elven prisoner. Upon freeing the man, we discover it is actually Eventine Alesidel, King of the Elves. Saving Eventine allows the elves to join the fight later. The other members of the company head to Tirsus, capital of Callahorn, to activate the Border Legion, which Balinor commands. Of course, once they arrive, they find they have been betrayed. The Border Legion has been disbanded, and Balinor's brother Palance has assumed the throne of the country. Palance is being manipulated by Stenman, an agent of the Warlock Lord, who eventually kills Palance and runs. Balinor, with no time to mourn his fallen brother, reforms the Border Legion and sets about kicking Northland army ass. So, let's talk about Shea. Last we saw him, he was doing the Niagara Falls thing without a barrel. He loses consciousness and finds himself captured by gnomes. After some quality time with his new gnome friends, Shea is rescued by a one-handed thief named Panamon Creel, and his buddy, Keltsit Malakos, the rock troll. Shea's new friends decide to travel with him to the Skull Kingdom, home of the Warlock Lord, where they find Skull Mountain, and within it, the Warlock Lord and the Sword of Shannara. Once there, Shea wrestles the sword away from the now insane Orlfane and is confronted by its power. It is at this moment that we discover why Shannara wasn't able to finish the Warlock Lord 5 centuries ago. The sword has a single power. It dispels lies and forces you to accept the truth, no matter how horrible that truth is. For Shea, that was that he was a weak, sometimes selfish, sometimes petty person. Well, at first, this was soul-crushing. Shea saw the truth. Of course he was. He was a mortal being. He wasn't perfect, and he needed others to help him get through, sometimes ending with their lives being lost. The sword revealed his true nature, and Shea accepted it, allowing him to fully command the sword's power. His ancestor was raised to see himself as powerful, capable, and noble. He was a prince and later king. Having that stripped away from him, even knowing it was coming, scared him, and when scared, he fell back on using the sword as a blunt instrument. It hurt the Warlock Lord, but couldn't kill him, since Jurel hadn't become the sword's master. Shea was able to do this. He was able to become the sword's master, so when he was confronted by the Warlock Lord, he used the weapon as it was intended. He forced the Warlock Lord to cease hiding behind the lie that he was immortal, that he lasted forever. In reality, he had been dead for centuries. All that remained was a hollow reflection of the man he once was. When this deception was lifted and the truth brought into the light of the sword, Brona ceased to exist. When the Warlock Lord is destroyed, the Northern Army loses its will to fight since it was being driven by his magic. They basically turn tail and run. Allanon journeys into the Northland looking for Shea, saving his life. While Shea is recovering, Allanon reveals that he is the son of Bremen, the druid who made the Sword of Shannara, and that he is centuries old. Allanon apologizes for manipulating Shea, for not telling him about the sword. But given the failure of Jurel, with full knowledge of how the sword worked, he was convinced that the only way for it all to work out was for Shea to learn of the sword's power and purpose on his own. Allanon leaves to go and enter into the druid sleep to heal and recharge his magic. Life returns to normal, and the world returns to a state of peace and tranquility, at least for a while.